almost every day.
Yeah.
But it
you get used to it, though. Yeah, yeah. I used to do the 5-2, but this is easier. So.
Oh, okay. Great. Okay, so we're recording. Can you just start by introducing yourself and telling us what it is that you do, who you work for?
Yeah. So my name is BRYNDIS Nielsen, and I work for Climeworks, which is a Swiss company that specializes in direct air capture.
Cool. Why do you work for them?
Well, I live here in Iceland, and we're always very fascinated with science and finding new ways to solve things. And when I heard first about Climeworks, I had actually been working on another climate-related technology here in Iceland. And I was really excited to hear they were coming here. And then I was recommended to them as a communications specialist. And I've been working with them ever since Orca opened.
Just on it's not in the questions here, but I'm just thinking about it as far as communications, because I mean that's one of the biggest issues. I mean, the science is being developed, but the problem is the people. So, what are your thoughts on being able to communicate what's being done here?
So, I think the biggest misconception is that people think that this might sort of be like a magic bullet of sorts, so that we can just collect carbon dioxide directly from the air and not do anything else. But unfortunately, that is not the case. It's not a magic bullet. It will be one of the solutions we will need to fight climate change. So what we need to do first and foremost, 90% of what we need to do is reduce emissions. 10% is to capture the CO2 back and get it stowed away in a manner that doesn't, can I do that again? Sorry,
yeah, of course,
I got caught up in the end.
I'm just going to stop and start.
Yep. So direct air capture is not the solution. It's not the big solution. It does not prevent us from having to reduce emissions. Reducing emissions is 90% of what we have to do, and then capturing CO2 back from the air is about 10%. Now, what we need to make clear is that, and people often misunderstand, is that they think that we can just develop technologies and then we don't have to change anything. We don't have to change how we treat the planet. We can just find this one magic bullet that will erase all our sins, so to speak, but that's not the case, of course.
Great. Okay, that's great. Excellent, thanks. What inspired the Orca project, you know?
So originally Climeworks was started by a couple of German engineering students who met while they were studying engineering in Zurich, Switzerland. They were both avid alpine enthusiasts, so they were skiing and exploring the Alps together, and they could see firsthand that. Oh, it's the. Okay, it's this way. No, it's the exhibition. All right.
Yes, this is keep going. It's just like this.
All right.
We start that one again.
All right. So it was. So originally it was an idea of a couple of engineering students in Switzerland. So Jan Wurzbach and Christoph Gewald met while they were studying engineering, and they were bonded not through their love of just engineering but also alpine skiing, so they were visiting the Alps and skiing quite a lot. And they could see firsthand that the glaciers were retreating. So they could directly see climate change with their bare eyes. So they started working on climate-related issues in their studies. And once they graduated, they decided to create Climeworks, which is a company that specializes in direct air capture. Okay. I can say that again better. Can I say it again better?
Yeah, if you prefer.
Yeah.
I thought that's quite good, but yeah,
all right.
Let's go again. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, this is a pickup.
All right. So the idea for Climeworks was originally was created when these two German engineering students in Metz. Okay, sorry. So the original idea for Climeworks, or direct air capture, was created when a couple of German engineering students studying engineering in Zurich in Switzerland met, and they became fast friends, not only through their love of engineering but also alpine skiing. So they were in the Alps quite a lot, and they saw the glaciers retreating with their own eyes, and they really and passionately wanted to do something about it. So the idea of direct air capture was born. Of course, you have some precursors to this technology. You have situations where you need to collect CO2 from the air, such as in submarines and on space stations. But they had to develop a technology where they could turn that into sort of like enlarge in it and make it more efficient and create a method of doing it.
Great, okay. So next question, which just disappeared, is you kind of said it already, but just in and of itself, just explain why climate restoration is so important. Yeah.
So we've been pumping CO2 into the air for well over 100 years. We, of course, need to reduce emissions first and foremost, but we have quite a lot of historic CO2 in the air, and we're still pumping way too much CO2 into the air. So most scientists agree on the fact that we need to reduce emissions, but we also need to take it directly from the air as well. Of course, there are different methods of doing so. I mean, reforestations, preservation of wetlands. We need sort of all hands on deck. We have other technologies that are being developed, but we need to further all of them and work together to collect this historic CO2 from the air, as well as reducing emissions.
Can we talk about the, I'll stop for a second. Talk about okay, yeah, if you could just talk about just the principles of the funding of this, how it happened.
Yeah, so the funding for this is a mixture of grant and equity. So we've gathered, I think, around $810 in April 22 to operate Climeworks and for the scale-up as well. So this is a mixture of public grants, but also large institutional investors in infrastructure, individual investors, and grants from like the EU, Switzerland, and Germany.
Okay, great. And can you just talk a little bit about the relationship between Climeworks and the power company and carbon company?
Yeah, Carbfix. All right. So Climeworks is, of course, a Swiss company. So why are we in Iceland? Well, we capture CO2 directly. Wait a second, are they? Okay. All right. So Climeworks is a Swiss company, and we specialize in capturing CO2 directly from the air. But what do you do with it once you have it? So you can resell it to greenhouses, or you can sequester it. And it was definitely something that we wanted to do, not just capture it and find other ways of putting it back in the air. We wanted to sequester it permanently. So that's when we came across Carbfix, which is an Icelandic company. And they take CO2 and they mix it with water, and creating fizzy water effectively, and they pump it into the ground, and the CO2 binds with the minerals in the rock below us, and it becomes stone in less than 2 years. So that sounded like something that we could really get on board with. So here in Iceland, we're collaborating with 2 Icelandic entities. First is the On Power geothermal station, one of the largest geothermal power stations in the world, where we get our renewable energy and heat. And the second is the Carbfix company, which does the sequestration part. So Orca is combined of course, Climeworks technology for the direct air capture, Carbfix for the sequestration, and then we rely on power for the power.
Great, okay, thanks.
If you can cut that into bits that make sense. Yeah.
No, that was good.
All right, so Orca is the world's first direct air capture and storage plant. It's also the largest direct air capture unit in the world and the only one that's in commercial use. Now, Orca captures 4,000 tons of CO2 per year. And while that sounds quite a lot, if you look at the global scale of things, it's minuscule. But what it is the first of its kind, and it's designed to ease scale up. And that's our goal. We are planning for a 10-fold scale up, so we'll be at the megaton levels by the end of this decade, and to be at gigaton levels by 2050. And that is what we will need if we are planning to stay below the 1.5 goal set by the UN.
Okay.
Set by the UN. Did I fuck it up by saying something wrong? Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to repeat that, or
just the last bit? Because we can cut back some forwards.
All right. Yeah, so we can be at gigaton levels by 2050, and that is what we need if we mean to stay below the 1.5 limits, degree limits that we're hoping to stay below.
Okay, and just briefly, as though you're actually there at the plant stage. Yeah. This scar.
Yeah. Oh, yep.
Over there, and we'll take a shot of it. Over there, they're building the next iteration of it, which is 72 units.
Yeah, yeah. So here is Orca, as you can see, fully operational. And just behind me, you'll see Mammoth, which is the next step in the scale-up plan. So Orca has 8 collector units. Mammoth will have 72, so it will be capable of capturing 36,000 tons of CO2 per year.
Okay, just on a personal level, how do you feel about what you're doing, and what are your thoughts about the future, bearing in mind humanity has a pretty bad reputation for taking up things at the right time? We always usually just respond to chaos and try and fix fuck-ups as opposed to fixing it beforehand.
Yeah. Well, if we had started reducing emissions as soon as we knew where we were headed, we wouldn't need things like direct air capture, right? But it's a little bit too late for that. So we need to develop these technologies on top of reducing these emissions. Actually, working for Climeworks gives me hope, because you see that there are technologies being developed that are now operational that can really give us hope for the future. I think it's very easy to get depressed when you think about the scale of things, but I think we also need to. We need to think in a mixture of. We need to think. Okay, so we need to think like in a mixture of like an engineer and someone who's really positive. We have to look at what's possible, and then we need to create ways to get there, logical ways, and then we need to stick to our plans. Can I say that in a different manner? Okay. I think we have to be positive, because if we're not positive, nothing's ever going to happen. But we also have to be very logical, and we have to create a timeline how we're going to do it, and we need to get everyone involved. We need to get the market involved. We need to get people involved. We need to get governments involved for regulatory changes, and investors, so that we can make everything happen. But it's possible. We can do it. But we need to be focused, and we need to be optimistic that we can, because if we think we can't, we will not be able to.
And you're a mother, right?
I'm a mother of 2 kids, yeah.
Just tie that in a bit, I suppose.
Yeah.
Looking forward.
All right. So, So, I'm not young, but relatively. I'm 45. I have 2 kids who are growing up. I want them to have a future. I want them to be able to have kids, and their kids to have kids. No, that sounds so very like, almost eugenics something. Okay, I'm going to start again. I will populate the earth. No, I mean
their legacy is what we leave, right?
Yeah. I mean, okay. So I mean, I have kids. I have to think about their future, and we have to think about everybody's future. This is not just about how comfortable I can sit in my sofa driving my diesel truck. We have to think further ahead. If we continue in the same manner as we're doing now, we won't get there. We need to change. Each and everyone needs to change and do our best in this concerted effort to save our planet.
That's great. That's really good. Thank you. Okay, so this is the outside voiceover.
Mm-hmm. So here we are standing in front of the collector containers, which are the modular units that Orca consists of. Those are the direct air capture units. So each of these has 6 chambers, and each of those has 2 vents that are pulling in the ambient air. Now, inside each of these chambers, you have a specialized filter which captures the CO2 molecules. When the wind passes through, it captures the CO2, and what leaves on the other end is pure air than before. when the filter is full, we have automatic doors that close that particular chamber, and then we heat it up to around 100 degrees Celsius, which is the boiling point of water. This releases the CO2 molecules from the filter, and then we suck that back into the processing hall. If I continue into the processing hall then from there?
Yeah.
So now we're in the processing hall, where you can see we have the hot water and the cold water intake. It's a little bit like a big boiling room, right? So we have pumps that pump the steam into the chambers to release the CO2. And then we have pumps that suck back in the CO2 molecules from the filters outside. We then collect and purify the CO2, and then we gather it here up in this big blue balloon before we send it in a slightly more concentrated form through an underground pipeline to Carbfix for the sequestration process, where basically you mix the CO2 with water and then you pump it about a half a mile down into the basaltic bedrock. And there the CO2 reacts with the minerals in the basaltic bedrock and it becomes stone itself. So we're talking about storage in geological terms, not a human life scale terms.
Okay, that's great. And now I'm just going to stop and start. It's just the modular thing, and then you're standing outside.
Yeah. Yeah. So here we are outside these collector containers, which are container-sized, as the name implies, which means that they are very easy to fit into the transport infrastructure. And it also means that we can create new orchid-type plants in a relatively short amount of time. So you can think of them a little bit like Lego blocks. So here at Orca, we have 8 of these. Over at Mammoth, which is our next step in the scale-up plan, we will have 72 of those. Okay.
And just in broad principles, you know, it's windy as hell today. Essentially, we've got fans here, and it's actually sucking in there.
Yeah. So we have these fans that are pulling in the ambient air, pulling the air through these filters that gather the CO2. You would think that here on this windy heath that we would have enough natural wind, so to speak, to power this. But we need a more steady stream. And believe it or not, we do have days that are not so windy.
That's great.
I can also maybe mention about why are we on the top of a mountain in Iceland where it doesn't seem so polluted, but you know, because.
Sure, thanks.
So why would we be collecting CO2 here in the highlands in Iceland where there's very little pollution? Well, that is a good question, but the thing is that CO2, although it's only 0.04% of the atmosphere, it dissolves incredibly quickly. So we have about the same level of CO2 in the air here as we would in New York or Delhi or Tokyo. So we can basically capture CO2 from the air wherever.
One other point, if you can...
So capturing CO2 can be done in 2 ways. You can either collect it point source, which is directly from the exhaust pipes of factories, for example, and there you'll find the CO2 in a very concentrated form, so it's quite easy to capture. The other method is direct air capture, and this has proven to be a little bit more tricky because their CO2 is only about 0.4% of the atmosphere. So it's a little bit like trying to capture a needle in the haystack times 1,000. So that has been a little bit more difficult, which is why the direct air capture industry has been a little bit, it has proven to be a little bit more difficult to scale that up.
And then can you just add to that the fact that
really
point source sequestration is just stopping more
it's mitigation and not a negative.
Absolutely, whereas what you're doing is actually reducing the net.
Okay, can I do the whole thing and then I'll include that? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So when we're talking about collecting CO2, we're usually talking about either point source collecting, which means that we're collecting straight from the smokestacks, so to speak. And that's quite, it's tricky, but it's not as difficult as direct air capture. So when you're collecting from point source, there's a very high concentrate of CO2, which makes it easier to capture. However, that falls under more like climate mitigation. You're just, the plant in question is polluting less than it would otherwise, which is great. Direct air capture, on the other hand, is about negative emissions. It's about capturing what is already out there and removing that from the atmosphere. And that has proven to be a little bit more difficult because the concentration is so much lower than from the smokestacks. That's why when we hear about capturing CO2, most often we're hearing about it in relation to some industrial processes, which means which means point source capturing, while direct air capture is, well, Orca is the only one that's in commercial operations today.
That's great. I mean, they talk about it in terms of historic CO2 as well.
Yeah.
I guess,
yeah. So, you know, so point source capturing is mitigating how much you're polluting. Direct air capture is capturing the historic emissions. We've been pumping out CO2 into the air for quite a lot. I can.
Oh no, it's fine. Yeah, a couple of hundred years.
Yeah.
1760.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, where did I start? So capturing direct air. So when we're talking about direct air capture, we're capturing historic emissions. We're talking about that we've been pumping CO2 into the air since about 1760 or so. And the levels of CO2 in the air are much higher than that now. Hopefully, if we continue to scale up and other similar entities, direct air capture entities, can also scale up, hopefully we'll manage to get the air back to what it was before the Industrial Revolution. That means, of course, a lot of work needs to be done, but it is possible. So Orca is also very efficient. So if we were to grow trees here in the same area that Orca is located, Orca would still be about 1,000 times more efficient in collecting the CO2 than the trees would be.
Just got it.
Okay.